Apprentice now of Dracovin, Lord Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue my discussion on the various campaign settings of Dungeons & Dragons, many of which date back to AD&D, and where we started with Spelljammer, Dungeons & Dragons Adventures in Space. Alright, so, we were talking about combat. Let's talk about scale combat, because the fact is, you can get in circumstances where an entire crew is stocked by PCs. That's fine. You're going to want to have them control themselves, do all their actions and things like that. But there are plenty of circumstances where you're going to have two crews of characters fighting against each other, and they're all mooks. They're all NPCs. They're all low-level NPCs, most likely. Very unimportant ones, and the large-scale combat between the two of them, if I was to roll that out directly, would just bog things down completely and utterly. It would just slow things down so much. So I don't want that. I want to make it that this combat between two ships' crews, who are unimportant, faceless NPCs, happens quickly. So that's what this is going to be. Faceless NPCs battling it out. We're not involving the PCs. PCs should not be involved in these rules anyway. PCs tip scales majorly to one side or another. Anything the PCs would be doing is consider their own combat. Over here, they're taking care of it. While they're fighting, this is going on in the background. So there might be some of the crew over there battling against the PCs, taking care of that. Keep them separate over there. Any of the remaining crew fighting the other crew, we're worrying about over that here. So we're basically splitting up the combats. And that's going to be what makes this work. We're keeping them to themselves. Besides the fact, PCs should be under player control, of course. Those people aren't going to want you just to roll for them randomly on a little, just quick rolls. That's not fun for them. They want to have themselves do awesome stuff in the background. So now we've seen the two major reasons to get rid of them. Too powerful, and they're going to want to play themselves. Alright, so this system works best when we have an entire crew that's basically the same as each other. A bunch of humans, a bunch of minotaurs, whatever it is. The crew is very similar to each other. It works very easily. Now granted, if my crew is basically split up between, let's say, a bunch of humans and a bunch of minotaurs, the best thing you can do is effectively split them up. Have each group work separately. And then have both groups working together at the same time against a common foe. You'll be rolling sort of separate in a way, and it keeps a little bit of separation, and it keeps a little bit of difference between them enough. Each one will, though, have its own attacks and casualties in this entire situation. Now, first way to do it, averages. You're going to want to determine the averages for either side of the conflict. There are two ways to do this. The first is the most simple way, which is you just take one NPC's stat block. You look at what its hit dice are. There's your average. Its armor. That's its average. Its attacks. That's its average. That's the easiest way of doing it. And this works a lot of times with a lot of generic mooks, but sometimes there is a little variety there that could make those averages change a little bit. In this circumstance, you can also take a little bit more difficult of a stance, but it still will work fine. I take the actual averages of everything. I look at each one of the NPCs involved in a crew. I add up all their hit dice. I divide it by the number of crew. That's my average. I do the same for AC. I do the same for the average damage for all the weapon attacks that they have. I figure out the averages. In this case, if it's half, it rounds up. If it's below half, it rounds down. That's how you figure it out when we're figuring out percentages here. And we can easily come up with an average number for hit dice, armor, and weapons now. That's actually an average. We're going to use these average crewmen we've created on either side and compare them to figure out number of attacks. So, first we look to the attacking crew, the crew that we're calling the attacking crew. We look to the number of members of that crew, and then we divide that by the average defender's hit dice. How many hit dice it has. That tells us the number of attacks the attacking crew gets. In effect, how many attacks per round they roll. You will do the same for the defending crew then. You will see the defending crew's numbers and divide that by the attacking crew's hit dice. That tells us how many attacks each side get. Now, each turn, both sides roll attacks. Each hit, basically, each time that they meet the AC of the other crew, that's a kill or an incapacitation on a member of that crew. So the attackers roll all their dice, they see what happens to the defenders. Defenders roll all their dice, see what happens to the attackers. Casualties occur. Now, the amount of dice you're rolling can be modified by special circumstances. Sometimes you can roll half the normal dice that you would have here, or double it. In cases of doubling, if my crew has weapons that could do 12 or more damage on average, then yes, I will double the amount of casualty dice I can possibly cause to this crew here. They can do a lot of extra damage. On the other hand, if my crew does an average that's less than 6 damage, well, half the number of dice. They aren't very effective at defeating, incapacitating this crew. Another reason to double dice would be special abilities. Things like poisons or gazes or psionic abilities, things like the mind flares, mind blasts, that would disable or outright kill people, could be given as an effect here of doubling dice. Basically, it makes them much more efficient at taking out the other crew. As casualties mount, the number of dice they roll alters because we have less crew members that we're dealing with. And the fact is that each attack is resolved in initiative order of the ship. So this ship might get the attack off first, cause a bunch of casualties, so when they roll and maybe get a bunch of casualties, they roll less dice already. They're being modified quickly and efficiently. So initiative can make a big difference here also. Now, using this system, losses, actual crew losses, are kind of apportioned as the players see fit, but it's always taken from the crew that was actually involved in the fight. If part of your crew wasn't involved in the fight, they're certainly not taking any losses from this battle. At the end of the fight, you, as the dungeon master, roll a d6. You multiply this by 5%, and out of all the casualties that accumulated on either side, on this side here, that's how many actually have either died or have suffered mortal wounds and will soon be passing away. The rest have just been incapacitated in some way. You roll this percentage for both sides of the crew, whether it's the attacker, defender, the winner, or the loser. Granted, the winners can easily then tend to their incapacitated, which are their wounded, get them back on their feet and stuff, be ready to continue whatever is going on. The loser of the battle, well, the incapacitated could easily be taken prisoner, made slaves, various things could occur to them. Or they could be executed also. I mean, it depends on who won here, the circumstances of what's going to happen to the losers. Now, there are some other considerations using this system. For one thing, this works perfectly fine for missile or light, for archery or light missile combat between two ships. You could use the system too. It's a great way of having people firing bows and stuff at each other to eliminate a whole bunch. Another consideration, if one side can only be affected by magical or silver weapons, and the other side doesn't have such weapons, the side without those weapons is the ones that are going to be suffering casualties. The ones with the special defenses that absorb damage in some kind of way, depend, even any system, any D&D system, any edition where they have some kind of resistance or immunity or damage reduction, you're kind of screwing over those guys over on the other ship. Now, fights between drastically different types of creatures should probably be handled in traditional combat. Very powerful creatures tend to be, well, a lot of their abilities are mitigated in this combat situation, so while we can say, like, oh, we're rolling double dice for our Mind Flare friends, if we would use Mind Flares in actual combat, they are beasts that could tear apart a crew quite effectively with some of their psionic abilities, that only a handful of them might even handle a pretty big crew. So there is good reason to roll it out as a normal combat. Then you're going to have to look at the circumstances of who's fighting who and figure out if this combat type situation is effective to use or if it's appropriate to use. Now, to finish up today, I wanted to talk about towing. We talked about two ships grappling together and being considered one ship. If they do get to a circumstance where they are considered one ship and one wants to move the other, that's towing. So, grappled together, one ship wants to move the other. This is considering that it's part of all one big ship then. So the two ships combine, you add their tonnage together to see what kind of effect that has on the helm, which is being used to pilot these two. Now, instead of just piloting one ship, you're piloting two, basically, ships combined. And it will be a lot harder to do. So yeah, you add it together, and that will have if the helm can actually move this still, that's an important thing. And even if it moves it, if it slows it down significantly. So an important note here is, the stronger of the two helms in this case, when they are grappled and towing together, is the one that will be effective. That's an important note here, that the stronger helm will take precedent. The weaker helm will become subservient and will be ineffective. There can be circumstances where a much larger ship has a weaker helm than the smaller ship, so the smaller ship can now tow the larger ship, and it will surprise the crap out of them, but the more powerful helm wins in the end here. Whatever the weaker ship is, regardless of size, it becomes subservient until those lines are cut and they separate the ships. As long as they are considered one ship, stronger helm can drag the other wherever it wants. And this is using the current SR, Spelljamming rating. That's what you're dealing with. So if something happened to one side in order to reduce its Spelljamming rating temporarily, or to damage it that it could be repaired, well, then they could switch circumstances at some point in time. There is an exception here, of course, if the Spelljamming ratings, the SRs, are equal. Then nothing happens. Neither ship takes dominance until one of them changes its SR rating, or one of them becomes unhelmed. When either occurs, guess what? Then we've managed to make one be able to tow the other. But that's it for today. So, we handled a version of large-scale combat, we can call it maybe small-scale combat, on ships involving NPC crews. Gave you information how it works, and this is a combat system that works actually pretty decent for pretty much any edition of Dungeons & Dragons. It's a great way of making things very simple between a couple of ship crews. You could even use it on sailing ships if you want to, so I would recommend taking a look at it if you are considering something that will speed up some ship-to-ship combat. We then also talked about, of course, towing another ship, and the circumstances in which it works. Stronger SR helm goes over the lower SR helm every time. Ties, nothing. In the next episode, though, we are going to move into encounters, invasion, and running away. A little bit more connections with the way that combat work here. These are things that we're going to have to worry about. Evasion is a big one, and running away might be something you want to do on your ship. Anyway, I hope you're having a great day. If you have any interesting stories about either, like, small-scale combat, like crew versus crew, or even large-scale combat maybe out there that you want to share with me, I love hearing your stories. Please put it in the comments below. And regardless, though, until the next time, I bid you farewell.